Okay, I have a question for you. Why is the most emotionally unavailable, broody, don't talk to me kind of character the most romantic character in romance right now? Why do we love them? Today, we're gonna get into one of the reasons why. We're going to break down Grumpy X Sunshine, the history, the psychology, what we love, what we hate, and the books that do it right. Let's go. So for anyone that doesn't know what Grumpy X Sunshine is, I mean, the name kind of speaks for itself. You've got one character who's closed off, guarded, maybe a little mean, and then you've got this other character who is bubbly or hopeful or even a little naive and completely annoys our grumpy character. But at the end of the day, their relationship, their love, all of it is inevitable. And somehow it's like one of the most romantic tropes on the face of the planet. But here's the thing that people really don't talk about. This trope isn't actually all that new. It's actually kind of been around for a couple of centuries already. And if you know your literary history, you'll be able to see the DNA pretty easily. Look at Wuthering Heights. Now I know that there is some debate whether or not this actually fits under Grumpy X Sunshine because Catherine doesn't exactly fit the sunshine archetype that we know of today, nor do we really see that softening of our grumpy character in Heathcliff by the end. As a matter of fact, Heathcliff and Catherine are oftentimes, and rightfully so, looked at as a toxic couple, and a couple that doesn't really lead to a happily ever after. But what we can see in Wuthering Heights is the bones of what eventually became the Grumpy X Sunshine trope. Heathcliff is basically the blueprint of that dark, brooding, morally gray MMC that millennials have been obsessed with ever since Lucas Scott first appeared on our television screens. Though I do have to say, Jane Eyre is probably the truest blueprint of the Grumpy X Sunshine as we know it today. You've got Edward Rochester, who's cynical and physically imposing and orders people around with total disregard of social niceties. And while Jane isn't necessarily bubbly, she's hopeful, principled, and empathetic. And through that, she's able to tame Mr. Rochester and his moody nature through their conversations and connection. So maybe Wuthering Heights is more like the blueprint of the dark romance version of this trope, and Jane Eyre is the contemporary romance blueprint of this trope. By the time we hit the Harlequin romances of the mid-20th century, we gave our brooding MMC a job. This era took the Byronic hero and put him in a suit, and creating that alpha billionaire that we see on the covers of Kindle Unlimited books to this day. Whether he's a cold-hearted CEO or a stern doctor, he became the Ice King, a man who is emotionally closed off, but socially powerful. This is where the Sunshine character really started to have her work cut out for her. She wasn't just falling in love, she was performing an emotional rescue. She was turning this master of the universe back into a human being. It was the official birth of the I hate everyone but you energy. The one thing all of these older books tend to have in common is the fact that the FMC really didn't have much agency. There was an unmistakable power dynamic at play that mostly made our FMC a vehicle to redeem the MMC. Let's also dive into film history a little bit because I went to film school. I studied film history, criticism, and theory in college, so let's talk a little bit about my favorite film genre called the screwball comedy. It rose into prominence in the late 30s to early 40s, but it really actually started in the 1920s, the late 1920s. And I do believe that this film genre really does showcase the Grumpy X Sunshine trope to an extent. You have a man who is so annoyed by the FMC. And our Sunshine character isn't just nice, she's total chaos. She is the whirlwind that breaks into the MMC's world and turns it upside down and frees him from his boring, rigid life. It was really the evolution of Jane Eyre's moral sunshine to this manic pixie that we know from rom-coms today. A famous film critic and theorist, Andrew Sarris, often describes screwball comedies as a sex comedy without the sex. Everything that happens between the MMC and the FMC in these films is basically just foreplay, and their love is inevitable. And if you've never seen a screwball comedy and you love Grumpy X Sunshine, I highly recommend you checking them out. I have some of my favorites listed below. So now let's talk about where the name actually came from, because that is relatively new. It really started in the mid-2010s in fan spaces like Tumblr. Yeah, that's right. It started as ship culture in fan fiction. And without even realizing it, in the mid-2000s, because there wasn't really a name for it yet, I actually wrote a Grumpy X Sunshine fan fiction when I paired Hiei and Botan in Yu Yu Hakusho together. And if you're familiar with Yu Yu Hakusho, you might be wondering, why would you do that? Because nothing hits harder than a demon who hates the world as he falls for a woman who represents the light. And that is the heartbeat of this trope. But the actual term rose in popularity in 2020 and 2021 on social media spaces like BookTok and Bookstagram. So yeah, still, for all intents and purposes, a very new term. So whether it's gothic boars, a Harlequin office, or a screwball comedy set, the true heart of the Grumpy X Sunshine trope is always the same. It's about two people who should not work on paper, but whose friction creates a beautiful spark. The bottom line is, Grumpy X Sunshine isn't a trend. It's a fundamental human fantasy. And that's why it's actually survived through pretty much every single era of romance literature. All right, so why do we lose our minds for this? Why does this specific dynamic hit so differently than a lot of other romances? Well, it goes back to something innate in all of us. We want to be chosen. The Grump doesn't warm up to just anyone. They warm up to the Sunshine specifically. The Sunshine is the exception to the Grump's coldness and anger and unfiltered intensity. They are total opposites. A closed heart and one so open that it can actually open the ones around it. And let's be honest with ourselves, there is something intensely romantic about being the only one who can make the Grump smile. Let's talk about dark romance for a minute. The biggest pull of dark romance is I would burn down the world for the one I love. And that is also a core element of this trope. Even if it's a rom-com and the world will be fine, the energy is still there. As time went on in our more modern contemporary romances, our Sunshine started to gain a lot more agency. So much agency that books like Wuthering started to feel very unfamiliar. But one thing that has never changed is the Sunshine is unflinching. They are not afraid of the Grump. They stand up to them. They model unconditional warmth, and they rarely back down. And in a world that can feel conditional and cold, it's fun to live vicariously through these characters. This trope also showcases a lot of character development, and not just from our Grump. Because not only does the Grump soften to the Sunshine, but the Sunshine actually gets some edges. They bring out the best in each other because they see each other at their worst. I think that's the piece that often gets missed when we talk about Grumpy X Sunshine, because the best stories within this trope, it's not about the Sunshine character fixing the Grump. They're about two people who are genuinely incomplete on their own, and they find wholeness in each other. And that's not a redemption arc. That's an actual love story. So what we love about this trope at its core is the promise that being yourself, having that unwavering warmth, is enough to reach even the most guarded of hearts. And that's beautiful. Here is where I'm gonna have people in my comments. While I do love this trope, and trust me, I do love it, there are some valid criticisms of this trope that I do want to break down. The first big criticism is the Grump is just mean. There is a fine line between emotionally unavailable and emotionally abusive. The Sunshine character should be the Grump's partner, not their unpaid intern or their rehabilitation program. If the Sunshine has to do 100% of the emotional labor, that's not romance. And modern readers are getting increasingly tired of the I can fix him narrative that ties a woman's worth to what she can do for a man. How much verbal abuse she can go through before he finally snaps out of it. If the Grump treats the Sunshine poorly for 80% of the book and then just says, I'm sorry, I was scared, and that's the resolution, that's not a love story. That's a red flag, and not the good ones that we love in romance. There are many times also where the Sunshine character really has no inner life, that they are just there to service the Grump and bring him that character development we talked about. At the end of the day, the Sunshine character deserves their own wounds, their own arc, their own history and story. Another really big criticism of this trope is when like trauma or wounds are treated as plot devices and are solved through love alone. I mean, love is powerful, don't get me wrong, but it does not solve every single problem every human has. And sometimes the issues aren't the character archetypes themselves, but how the author treats it. Authors should always approach novels from a character or story perspective first. When an author writes to a trope, we often see caricatures. The trope becomes the personality that drives the story instead of being an ingredient in the novel. It is a subtle difference, but it's noticeable. Now, a lot of other criticism is at the sake of dark romance, which is oftentimes unfair because dark romance readers and authors find a lot of beauty and healing in the journey. But we do have to acknowledge the heritage. Do you remember our friends, if you can call them that, Heathcliff and Rochester? Those bones we talked about? Sometimes they're still just a little too visible. Critics of this trope often point out that this can romanticize control and isolation. If the grump is grumpy because they're isolating the sunshine or being possessive under the guise of being protective, we've strayed away from that beautiful spark and hopped right back into the gothic nightmare. So now let's talk gender. You might have noticed ever since the history part, I, for the most part, stopped using specific pronouns. That was intentional because this trope isn't a gender. It's a dynamic, and it belongs to everybody, regardless of their gender. Which brings me to the most valid criticism of this trope. For a very long time, this trope fit into one very specific box. A moody man and a bubbly woman fall in love. But thankfully, that's changing. With the rise of the golden retriever, I had to do it. With the rise of the golden retriever hero, we're seeing a much needed shift. Now in the straight books, we have women who are starting to be a little bit more moody or grieving or just having that closed off nature, and the guy that's trying to get the smile out of her. And we're seeing a lot more LGBTQ+ romances within this trope. And it's a beautiful thing. This trope is finally breaking outside of its box to be more dynamic, more diverse, and allowing any couple to be part of it. So here's my hot take. The difference between Grumpy X Sunshine that I love and ones that are frustrating to me is whether or not the characters actually impact each other or just tolerate each other. In the best versions of this trope, the Grump doesn't just become less mean, and the Sunshine doesn't just stay happy. They actually trade some of their DNA. The Sunshine learns boundaries and gets some of those edges we talked about, and the Grump learns that being vulnerable doesn't always mean being weak. When the book ends, they haven't just fixed each other. They've grown into a version of themselves that only the other could have brought out in them. And that's the real magic of this trope. It's not changing who you are for someone else. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. And you're becoming that because of them. And that's why from the moors of Yorkshire to the offices in Manhattan, we're never gonna stop reading. Okay, you knew this one was coming. Book recommendations. Let's go through some that I really like and let me know your favorites in the comments. Especially if they're more of those diverse ones, because I definitely need to diversify my reading of this trope. Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. I'll be honest, I've not read this one. Don't come for me. It is officially on my TBR after doing research for this video. It's basically the modern gold standard. Naomi is, I guess, sunshine personified, and Knox, I guess, is grumpy to his bones. From what I've read, this book gets it right because it gives Knox's grumpiness an actual history. And Naomi's warmth isn't just naivete. It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. In this one, you've got a grumpy fisherman and a sunshine socialite. And the fish out of water elements really adds to the comedy. But the payoff in this one feels so earned because Piper doesn't just exist in Brendan's orbit. She has a whole life that he has to eventually fit into. The Love Hypothesis by Allie Hazelwood. This one gave us a grumpy professor and a sunshine PhD student as they navigate a fake relationship, which just feels like a love letter to STEM. The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This workplace rivalry is basically the reason for the current rom-com boom. The banter between Josh and Lucy brings me back to those 1940s screwball comedies, and I love it. The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. Another fake dating hit. It features a brooding Aaron and a vibrant Lena, who is desperate for a wedding date. Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This features Jacob, who is quiet and emotionally guarded, and Brianna, who brings that sunshine energy. They write letters to each other while working at the same hospital. For the record, Life's Too Short also fits into this trope. And if you want more of that reverse of the trope with the you know, golden retriever kind of energy. Happily Ever Playlist has Jason, a golden retriever energy musician, who falls in love with Sloane, who is emotionally guarded because she's going through grief after losing her fiance. It just so happens that yours truly just happens to be my favorite of the three. So, Well Met by Jen DeLuca. This features Simon, a grumpy Renaissance fair organizer, and Emily, a newcomer who pushes every single one of his buttons. Twisted Love by Anna Huang. For my dark romance fans, you've got the epitome of the cold hero in Alex, who falls desperately in love with his sunshine Ava. I want to know your go-to grumpy ex-sunshine story. The one that you'd hand a stranger on the street. Drop it in the comments because I'm building a list. So here's where we've landed. Grumpy ex-sunshine isn't just a cute pairing. It's a 200-year-old literary fantasy about being seen by someone who is not looking for anyone. And the best versions of it make both characters better. If this video gave you the language as to why you love or even hate this trope, I want to know about it. And if there is a trope you want me to break down next, let me know that in the comments as well. I am Britt. I am a contemporary romance author who spends way too much time thinking about the bones of the stories we love. I'll see y'all next Thursday.